The morning she saw him standing in the doorway of her cafe, Lenora dropped an entire tray of cortados. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just stood there in the middle of Anchor and Grounds, surrounded by broken ceramic and pooling espresso, staring at the man she hadn't seen in 6 years, the man who had left her pregnant and alone in a Vancouver winter so cold it had felt biblical, and she thought very clearly, not here. Not in front of my daughter. Mira was in the back room. 7 years old, doing homework at the little corner desk Lenora had built for her out of reclaimed pine, the one with the crooked leg that Mira called characterful. She had her headphones on and was probably mouthing along to whatever audiobook she was obsessed with this week. She hadn't heard the crash. Not yet. Lenora bent down and started picking up the ceramic shards because her hands needed something to do. His name was Callum Voss. She'd met him 6 years ago at a fundraising gala she'd only attended because her friend Bex had twisted her arm about it. Lenora had been 28, exhausted from nursing school, and smelling faintly of antiseptic, wearing a borrowed dress that was a size too small. Callum had been standing by the windows overlooking False Creek, looking like he'd been poured into his suit, looking like a man who understood that every room he entered would eventually arrange itself around him. He'd looked at her across that room the way nobody had ever looked at her before, like she was the only solid thing in a place full of smoke. She'd known who he was. Everyone in Vancouver's financial core knew who Callum Voss was. What she hadn't known, what she'd found out 3 months later, after she was already in love with him, after she'd already made every mistake a person could make with another person, was the other half of his life. The half that operated out of warehouses along the Fraser River. The half that had conversations in parking garages. The half that explained why he always sat with his back to the wall. When she'd confronted him about it, he hadn't denied anything. He'd just looked at her with those gray eyes that had no warmth left in them at all and said, "You should leave, Lenora. I mean that. You should leave and you shouldn't come back." She'd been 10 weeks pregnant and hadn't known it yet. She found out 4 days later, alone in the bathroom of her apartment on Commercial Drive, holding a test while the radiator knocked and hissed, and she thought about calling him. She even dialed the first 3 digits once. But she remembered his face when he'd said it. She remembered that he'd meant it, so she didn't call. She finished nursing school. She saved money. She opened Anchor and Grounds on a quiet corner in Kitsilano 3 years ago, and it had become the kind of place where regulars left their umbrellas because they trusted you to hold on to things. She'd built a whole life around the principle that small, steady things mattered. Good coffee, honest bread, a crooked-legged desk in the back room where Mira did her homework after school, and now he was standing in her doorway. Lenora. His voice was the same. That was the thing that hit her like a physical weight. His voice was exactly the same, low and careful, like he thought about each word before he released it into the world. She stood up with a handful of ceramic shards and looked at him directly, because she had not survived the last 6 years by flinching. "We're not open yet," she said. "I know. The door was unlocked. It shouldn't have been." He stepped inside. He looked thinner than she remembered, and there were lines near his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was wearing a dark coat, no tie, the collar of his shirt open. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. He looked, she realized, with a fury she hadn't expected to feel so immediately, like he looked good, like time had been careful with him in a way it hadn't felt obligated to be with her. "I need your help," he said. She laughed. It came out sharp and short, like something cut loose. "You need my help. I wouldn't be here otherwise. That I believe." She carried the ceramic shards to the bin behind the counter and dropped them in, then turned to face him with the counter between them, because she needed something solid between them. What kind of help? He reached into his coat and she stiffened. She couldn't help it. 6 years of knowing what he was had trained her body to respond before her brain caught up. But he only pulled out a photograph. He set it on the counter and slid it toward her. She looked at it. A man she didn't recognize, 50s, heavy-jawed, photographed getting into a black SUV outside what looked like a hospital on Granville Street. "His name is Broward," Callum said. "He came into Vancouver 3 days ago. He's been watching a clinic in the West End." My clinic. She looked up. Your clinic? A medical clinic I fund. For people who can't, for people in complicated situations, who need medical help off the books. He said it without apology, but also without flourish, like it was a practical fact. The doctor who runs it called me 2 days ago and told me someone had been photographing staff. Yesterday, she didn't open. I've been trying to reach her since. Go to the police. Something shifted in his expression. I can't. You mean you won't? I mean going to the police would put the people who use that clinic in more danger than they're already in. Half of them are there because the official system failed them. Involving the police means names, records, investigations. These are people who cannot afford that. Lenora looked at the photograph again. She thought about what it meant that he had come here specifically to her. She thought about Mira in the back room. What do you want from me? She said. You're an RN. You know how that clinic operates. You've done outreach work. How do you know that? He was quiet for a moment. I've kept track of you. The words hit her differently than she expected. Not warm, not even close to warm, but not nothing either. Which was its own kind of problem. Get out, she said. Lenora, you don't get to come in here and tell me you've been keeping track of me, like it's something you're owed, like it's something that matters now. You told me to leave. I left. I built a life. I don't owe you access to any part of it. I know that. Then act like it. He put both hands flat on the counter, and she hated that even now, 6 years later, she noticed his hands. There's a woman at that clinic. Her name is Freda. She's 71 years old. She came to Canada 18 months ago from a situation I'm not going to describe to you. And she has been receiving treatment for something serious. And right now, she is probably alone and frightened because her doctor has gone dark, and I cannot reach her through channels that are safe. I need someone who can walk in there and check on her as a care worker, someone credentialed, someone who doesn't have my name attached to them. Lenora was quiet. He continued. I'm not asking you to get involved in anything else. I'm not asking for anything more than this. I'll pay you for your time. Don't, and I will be out of your life the moment she's safe. You were out of my life 6 years ago. That was your choice. Yes, he said. It was. Something in his voice when he said it, the complete absence of deflection, made her want to throw something at him, because she'd spent years constructing a version of Callum Voss that she could be angry at. A clean, uncomplicated villain, and the man standing in front of her was not uncomplicated. He never had been. That had always been the problem. I'll think about it, she said. Come back in an hour. Thank you. I said I'll think about it. That's not a yes. He nodded and left. She watched him go and then stood very still until she was sure the door had closed behind him, and then she put both hands on the counter and let out a breath that she'd been holding for approximately 6 years. Mom? She turned. Mira was standing in the doorway to the back room, headphones around her neck, looking at the door with the particular focused attention she brought to everything. She had Lenora's dark eyes and absolutely nobody else's, which Lenora had once thought was both a mercy and a cruelty. Hey, Bug. Did you finish the chapter questions? Who was that man? Nobody important, Lenora said, and hated herself a little for how easily it came out. Mira gave her a look that contained, somehow, the full weight of 6-year-old skepticism. You dropped a tray. I was startled. Go finish the chapter questions, and I'll make you a hot chocolate with the good flakes. Mira considered this negotiation and accepted it with the dignity of a small diplomat. She disappeared back into the room. Lenora turned to the espresso machine and began, with great deliberateness, to make herself a coffee she absolutely did not need. She called her friend Bex from the alley behind the café while the morning fog was still sitting low over the mountains. Bex picked up on the second ring. It's barely 8. Callum Voss just walked into my café. A pause. I'm sorry. What? He needs my help with something. A clinic. There's a woman who might be in trouble. Lenora pressed her fingers against her eyes. He says he's been keeping track of me. Of course he has, Bex said, with a flatness that suggested she was not surprised in the slightest, and that she found this deeply irritating. What are you going to do? I don't know. Yes, you do. Bex, Lenora, you already know what you're going to do. You're just calling me so someone will try to talk you out of it, and you can feel like you tried to resist. Lenora said nothing, which was itself a kind of answer. Just be careful, Bex said, and call me the second anything feels wrong. And Mira? Mira isn't going anywhere near any of this. Good. Bex paused. And Lenora? He doesn't deserve you. He never did. Just because something pulls you toward it doesn't mean it's safe. I know that. Okay, I love you. Call me tonight. She hung up. She leaned against the damp brick of the alley wall and looked up at the gray sky over Vancouver, the kind of sky that promised nothing and delivered rain anyway. And she thought about a woman named Freda who was 71 years old and alone and frightened, and she knew that Bex was right. She had already known what she was going to do before she'd made the call. She took Mira to school herself that morning, a detour she didn't usually make on weekdays. She walked her all the way to the door instead of dropping her at the corner, and she crouched down at the entrance and straightened Mira's collar and said, "Have the best day, okay?" Mira looked at her with those serious dark eyes. "Are you worried about something?" "No, bug. I'm just being a mom. You're usually a cool mom," Mira said with devastating accuracy. "This is the worried mom version." Lenora kissed her forehead. "Go. Learn things." She watched Mira walk through the doors and disappear into the stream of small people, and she stayed on the sidewalk for a moment longer than she needed to, watching the doors as if proximity could substitute for protection. Then she went to meet Callum Voss. The clinic was in a converted Victorian on a quiet block in the West End, unmarked except for a small brass plate that said Community Wellness Associates in letters designed to be overlooked. Callum had given her a key that morning, and the address, and nothing else except a name and a room number. She went in alone. He waited in the car, which had been the condition she'd set, and he'd agreed to it without argument, which had surprised her. The front office was empty and dim, chairs pushed to the walls, a reception desk with a dark computer screen. It had the particular quiet of a place that should have people in it. Lenora walked through the hallway, past exam rooms with their doors standing open, until she found the one that was closed. She knocked. "Freda? My name is Lenora. I'm a nurse. I'm a friend of the man who helps run this place. He sent me to check on you." Silence. And then, very quietly, "Is the doctor coming back?" Raspy, accented, present, unknotted something in Lenora's chest. "I don't know yet, but I'm here. Can I come in?" The door opened. Freda was small and very old and looked at Lenora with the careful assessment of someone who had spent a long life deciding who to trust and could not afford to be wrong about it anymore. She had a cardigan pulled tight around her despite the warmth of the room. She had an IV port on her left wrist, a bruise fading yellow around it. "He sent you," Freda said. It wasn't quite a question. "He did. He is a complicated man." "Yes," Lenora agreed. "He is." Freda looked at her for a long moment. "Come in," she said. "I will make you terrible instant coffee because it is all I have, and you will drink it to be polite." Lenora smiled. "That sounds exactly right." She stayed with Freda for 2 hours. She took her vitals. She reviewed the medication log the clinic's doctor had left. She called a colleague at VGH, a woman she trusted, and spoke carefully around the specifics while conveying enough for the colleague to agree to a discreet house call. She sat with Freda while the old woman told her about a granddaughter in Montreal she was trying to get sponsored, a process that had already taken 22 months and showed no signs of resolving. And she thought, while she sat there and listened and held a cup of terrible instant coffee, about what it meant that Callum funded a place like this, what it meant that he knew this woman's name, her room number, her situation, what it meant that his first instinct when she was in danger had been to find someone who could help her. She did not let it soften her. She was not naive. She understood that people could do genuinely good things for complicated reasons, and that this did not cancel out the genuinely bad things, and that human beings were not equations that balanced neatly. But she sat with it. She let it be complicated, the way Bex had warned her it would be. When she left, Callum was waiting exactly where she'd told him to wait. He looked at her face when she got in the car and seemed to read everything he needed to from it. "She's okay," Lenora said. "Frightened, but stable. I've arranged for a doctor I trust to see her tomorrow. She needs her actual medication schedule adjusted. Whoever's been managing her care has been playing it too conservatively." He exhaled slowly. It was the most human thing she'd seen him do in 6 years. Thank you. I'm not finished. She turned in her seat to face him. I need to know what happened to the doctor who was running that clinic right now. Because if she's been hurt, she hasn't. She went to ground voluntarily. She's at her sister's place in North Van. She panicked when she saw the surveillance and she ran, which I understand, but she's safe. She needs to know that Freda was there. I've already sent someone to tell her. Lenora looked at him, at the sharp angle of his jaw, at the way he held the steering wheel like he was forcing himself to hold it loosely. Why did you come to me? She said, specifically. There are other nurses in Vancouver. He was quiet for a moment. Because I knew you'd do it right. And because? He stopped. And because what? Because I owed you a reason to see me as something other than what you last saw me as. The honesty of it landed without warning. She hadn't expected it. She'd expected deflection or calculation or the careful management of impression that she'd watched him deploy 6 years ago with everyone except her. He had always been, only with her, unreasonably honest. She looked out the windshield at the quiet street. You don't owe me a better impression of you. You owe me 6 years of a co-parent. The silence that followed was enormous. I know, he said. She turned back to look at him. What? I know. He met her eyes, and he did not look away. I've known for 4 years everything in her went very still. What are you saying? I hired someone, after you left. To make sure you were, he stopped, restarted. I told myself it was just to make sure you were safe. And then I got a report that said you'd had a baby. And he pressed his mouth together. I didn't act on it. I told myself it was the right thing, that you had chosen not to tell me, that you had the right to make that choice. I did have that right. Yes, he looked at her steadily. And you don't have to forgive me for not acting on it, but I need you to know that it has not left me, not for a single day. Lenora thought about Mira at her crooked-legged desk. Mira, with her headphones and her chapter questions and her devastating assessment of situations. Mira, who had never once asked about her father, because Lenora had so carefully constructed a life where the shape of that absence didn't look like a missing thing. She thought about all the times Mira had been sick at night, and Lenora had sat alone on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., thinking, I should not be the only person in the world who loves this child this much. And she'd pushed the thought away every time, because it wasn't useful, because she was enough. She thought about what it meant that he'd known for 4 years. I need to get back to my cafe, she said. My lunch service starts in 40 minutes. Lenora, I heard you. She opened the door. I'm not ready to say anything else right now, but I heard you. She got out into the cool Vancouver air. She walked half a block and then stopped because her knees felt unreliable. She stood on the sidewalk with the mountain fog burning off overhead and thought, very clearly, what do I do with this? There was no clean answer. There had never been, with him, a clean answer. She walked back to her cafe. She did her lunch service. She made good coffee and honest food, and she smiled at her regulars, and she did not drop anything. At 2:15, Mira came in from school with her backpack on and her hair in a lopsided braid, and she climbed up onto her stool at the end of the counter and said, Can I have a hot chocolate? You can always have a hot chocolate. Mira watched her make it with the careful attention she brought to everything Lenora did, and then, without looking up. Is it about my dad? Lenora went very still. You've been weird all day, Mira said simply. The worried kind. And it started when that man came in this morning. And you do this thing where you touch your coffee cup handle when you're thinking about something you don't want to think about. You've been doing it all day. Lenora set the hot chocolate down. She looked at her daughter, this specific, remarkable, inconvenient, precious person, and she thought about every story she'd ever almost told, every question she'd ever carefully redirected, every morning she'd woken up and decided that today was not the day. Mira, she said, I want to tell you something, and I want you to know that I'm going to tell you the whole truth, and it's going to take more than one conversation, because the whole truth is complicated. But I'm done not telling it. Mira wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at her with those serious dark eyes. Okay, she said. His name is Callum. He's complicated. He and I didn't end things well. And he's your father. Mira was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a streetcar passed. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. "Does he know about me?" Mira asked. He found out. Not from me, but he found out. Lenora held her daughter's gaze, and that was wrong of me. I made a decision when you were very small that I thought was keeping you safe, and I want to be honest with you about the fact that it was also the easiest decision for me. And sometimes those two things look the same from the inside when they're not the same at all. Mira considered this with the gravity she brought to significant information. Does he want to know me? I think he does. Do you trust him? Lenora thought about Freda in her cardigan. She thought about a brass plate designed to be overlooked. She thought about his voice when he said, "I have not left it, not for a single day." "I'm working on it," she said honestly. Mira nodded slowly, turning her mug in her hands. Then she looked up. "Can I meet him?" It was the question Lenora had been afraid of, and also the question she had known was coming, and also, she realized, the question she had been moving toward all day without fully admitting it. "If that's what you want," Lenora said. "Yes, it's what I want," Mira said simply. Lenora looked at her daughter, at the straightness of her spine and the steadiness of her eyes, at all the ways she had arrived in the world already more herself than most adults ever managed to become, and felt something shift in her chest. Not relief exactly, not resolution. Something more like the first honest breath after a very long time of breathing carefully. "Okay," she said. "Okay, then we'll figure out how." Mira drank her hot chocolate. Lenora made herself a coffee she actually needed this time. Outside, the Vancouver afternoon was gray and specific and ordinary, and the mountains sat where they always sat, unhurried by any of it. And inside Anchor and Grounds, a woman and her daughter sat together in the particular quiet of two people who have just told each other the truth and are now, carefully deciding what to build from it. Lenora reached for her phone. She found his name in her contacts. She'd saved it that morning without quite admitting to herself that she was doing it, and she typed 3 words. "She wants to meet you." The reply came in under a minute. "Tell me when." She set the phone down and looked at her daughter, who was already pulling her homework out of her bag with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that the world did not stop for feelings, that you did your chapter questions, and you drank your hot chocolate, and you kept going, and you figured out the rest as you went. Just like her mother, Lenora thought. She picked up her coffee cup. She held it with both hands. And for the first time in 6 years, she did not feel alone in the particular way she had always felt alone. That specific, hollow aloneness of being the only person who knew the whole story. Now 2 people knew it. Soon, 3.